What's up, Taiwan? I'm Eric Gao, and thanks for joining us today for the news. The United Nations Annual Climate Summit has begun in Azerbaijan, where world leaders will decide how to address and reduce the impact of global warming. The conference comes after Donald Trump's U.S. election win, increasing fears that the president-elect could backtrack on climate progress. Rosie Greninger reports.
World leaders, negotiators and climate experts fill a hall in Azerbaijan's capital, Baku, as the UN's annual climate summit, COP29, gets underway. Looking to tackle the escalating climate crisis, some progress was made on the first day. Attendees backing a carbon credit system proposal that would see countries and companies pay for emission-reducing projects in return for credits to offset their own. The deal has been years in the making, part of the 2015 Paris Agreement, which seeks to keep global temperatures at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. An important step, as the summit's president warns the world is on the road to ruins.
Climate change is already here. From flooded homes in Spain to forest fires in Australia, from rising oceans in the Pacific to barren plains in East Africa. Whether you see them or not, people are suffering in the shadows. They are dying in the dark, and they need more than compassion, more than prayers and paperwork.
This 29th summit aims to chart what its leader calls a new path forward. The main goal of this year's meeting is increasing funding to curb the rise in global temperatures and support lower-income countries to reduce greenhouse gases. It's a goal being met with skepticism by climate activists who question the choice of Azerbaijan as host given its poor climate record. Despite this, attendees hope to secure a deal for up to $1 trillion in annual climate funding for developing countries, a major hike from the current $100 billion pact. For those nations, this goal represents survival, facing severe climate disasters including floods, landslides and bushfires that have increased by 700% in the past decade.
They're always saying, the potential risk of climate change, like we haven't been facing it as small islands for the last 30 years. So it's about looking at it's right here, it's right now. It's no longer a latent emergency.
The conference has been clouded by the US election, with many countries concerned Donald Trump's presidency victory could hinder climate progress. The president-elect has promised to roll back climate measures, walk out of the landmark Paris Agreement for a second time, and increase fossil fuel production in the US, the world's largest historic greenhouse gas emitter.
In January, we're going to inaugurate a president whose relationship to climate change is captured by the words hoax and fossil fuels. He's vowed to dismantle our environmental safeguards and once again withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement. That is what he has said, and we should believe him.
Despite Trump's threats, the US climate envoy pledged to continue climate work in the country. Over the next 2 weeks, leaders at the summit will continue to discuss ways to meet the Paris Agreement. But with this COP marking the last major talks before countries submit updated emission targets in 2025, and the world far off from the Paris Agreement's goals, the pressure is increasing. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Meanwhile, Taiwan's plan to cut out nuclear energy may have hit a roadblock. The government is being warned that to meet its clean energy goals, nuclear reactors may have to stay. Lawmakers are now considering new reactor technology, but as John Ventrias explains, that tech has its limitations.
For 8 years, the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, has pushed for Taiwan to say goodbye to nuclear power. Its goal for what it calls a nuclear-free homeland was originally set for 2025. But less than 2 months to go until that deadline, there's still one active plant, and signs of a rethink about how practical ditching nuclear power might be, with fossil fuels as the main alternative. One of the latest of these signs came in an exchange at the legislature Monday. The head of Taiwan's Academia Sinica, a top research institute, who also helps lead Taiwan's climate change committee, said a possible U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord would be a blow to the goal of a carbon-neutral world by 2050. He said other countries will need to respond, and that means getting all the clean energy possible.
近年我们没有放弃任何干净能源的本钱。
您当时有说要利用新科技提升核能安全性，或补强位于地震带的核电厂。我想这一些言论是否代表您对于国家能源的发展是不排除核电的？
从技术上来讲，这些是可行的。
是可行的，所以您不排除？
是的。
The head of a prominent business association says the economy minister has made similar remarks in private.
新能源的问题，我是跟郭部长交流，他认为台湾必须要用新核能来取代，才能解套很多问题，才能把电费降低。刚刚郭部长我有跟他私底下交流，他认为这些问题可以解决的，他有信心。我对这个郭部长的思维我也认可。
But what officials are calling new nuclear power has its limitations. Daniel Chen, who's pursuing a doctorate in nuclear energy, says that while reactors made with new tech are thought to be cheaper, they don't solve the problems that sparked debate about nuclear power to begin with, especially waste. While they were touted as being able to run on recycled fuel, security concerns mean that early promise hasn't amounted to anything.
The technology that is used to separate out the plutonium from the spent fuel to be used in new fuel can also be used to separate out the plutonium to be used in nuclear weapons, at least in principle. And so a lot of the so-called Generation 4 reactors that had this feature kind of got eliminated.
Still, the business community sees cheap, clean energy, old or new, as key to Taiwan's continued competitiveness. And so pressure on the government to change course isn't going away. Whether the ruling DPP is willing to do an about-face on its earlier nuclear-free campaign is another matter entirely. Eason Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Lawyers in Taipei are protesting changes to the judicial system, proposals they say could bring the country's highest court to a standstill. The legislature is considering amendments to raise the threshold for making a constitutional court ruling. That proposal would require 10 out of the 15 justices to agree, rather than the current simple majority. With only 8 justices sitting on the bench right now, protesters warn that passing the amendment may paralyze the court's operations. Taiwan's constitutional court has ruled on major issues impacting society, such as same-sex marriage and the death penalty. To learn more about the pushback over the judicial reform bill, Tiffany Wong spoke with attorney Wei Sung-hong.
Can you tell me more about this judicial reform bill? What exactly is being proposed?
这一次他们提的是宪法诉讼法的修正案，事实上条文不多，但是他们希望把这个大法官的无论如何在大法官即使有缺额没有顺利通过任命的情况，少于这个15位的情况，都要以15位来计算。那同时把同意的门槛也提高到2/3，也就是无论大法官的宪法法庭有几位，只有超过10位的大法官同意的时候，才有可能做成宪法判决。那这个结果也会让，如果像现在我们台湾的现在的宪法法庭只剩下8位大法官，他就不能够做成，在新法通过之后，他就不能够做成任何的宪法判决。
Proponents of the bill say that raising the threshold for judicial decisions would actually increase the fairness of these decisions. What are your concerns about this?
我想分几个部分。第一个，宪法法庭其实不是在宪法上不是一个民主机关真正要负责民主多元的是立法院。那第二个就是说，台湾社会很多争议的判决，其实不是透过这个少数法官来做成决定。我们大法官在这些像同婚案、死刑案，其实都是有高度共识的。所以这个是一个就是透过这次的宪法诉讼法说要来针对宪法法庭来做这样的改革，是一个假议题。那第三个就是说，如果新法通过之后，我们担心，因为大法官要负责对于人权侵害案件的国家权利的违宪的案件来做判决。新法通过之后是不会有大法官针对这些判决来做成违宪的判决。那大法官也要负责对于总统、副总统的违法来行使弹劾来做弹劾的判决。那如果大法官的门槛提高到这么高，我们也担心日后宪法法庭停止运作之后也不会有国家机关能够针对这个总统、副总统的违宪来做成弹劾。
The Constitutional Court recently ruled that laws expanding the power of the legislature are partially constitutional. Do you think this call for now judicial reform is pushback for that decision?
有观察者是这样说，那台湾过去刚才这个李全和律师也提到，过去其实也确实有很多案例，立法者被宣告违宪之后，用这个来做回应，或者是甚至报复的手段。那这一次确实很多社会观察认为有这个情况，那也会创造很多宪政上面的危险。
That was Wei Seng-hong, attorney at law. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has reportedly tapped Florida Senator Marco Rubio to be his Secretary of State. Rubio has a long history of working on foreign policy issues in the Senate. He ran against Trump in the Republican primary, but later became a staunch supporter and was in the running to be Trump's vice president. Rubio is just one of several announced or reported appointments. Trump will reportedly tap Florida Representative Mike Waltz for the role of National Security Advisor. Both Waltz and Rubio are considered China hawks and supporters of more military aid for Taiwan. Trump also announced New York Representative Elise Stefanik as his pick for UN ambassador. Veteran immigration official Tom Homan is up for the role of border czar. Homan has worked under both Democratic and Republican administrations, where he oversaw a record number of deportations. Trump has promised to deport millions of undocumented people as president. Peru's government has deployed thousands of troops across its capital, Lima, as APEC 2024 gets underway. The extra security measures are in preparation for days of strikes and protests during the economic forum. Reese Ayers reports from Lima.
A city on standby. Security across the Peruvian capital city of Lima has been ramped up as delegations from around the world arrive for this year's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, or APEC. And officials here are doing all they can to ensure that nothing disrupts the high-level gathering, deploying 15,000 troops across the city.
Estamos seguros que la labor conjunta de las Fuerzas Armadas y la Policía Nacional dará como resultado un foro APEC 2024 exitoso y una imagen de unidad y fortaleza que será muy positiva para el Perú y para el mundo.
The annual economic forum brings together 21 member states, representing around 40% of the world's population and 60% of the global GDP. And over the coming days, they'll meet here to discuss trade, tech, and sustainability across continents. And coming for his last big international forum, US President Joe Biden, expected to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping for the first time since last year's APEC summit. Also on the agenda, the future of China and Peru relations, as Xi is expected to inaugurate a megaport that will become one of the biggest trading ports in South America.
Roads are blocked and security is tight here in Lima as all eyes turn to Peru, which now must juggle hosting one of the world's most consequential international conferences while dealing with potentially disruptive domestic unrest.
There have been protests here since September over a rise in extortion and violent crimes that have left more than 10 people dead. Protesters are demanding the government does more to protect its civilians and are planning more demonstrations during the forum, prompting officials to order schools, universities and offices across Lima to close, with students and workers told to stay home to clear the streets for the high-level meetings.
Última hora dieron diciendo que van a ser virtual los trabajos del ministerio, del banco, todo eso. Pues, bueno, nos cayó un balde de agua, ¿no?
Bueno, en realidad no afecta porque al contrario para nosotros es tener más seguridad porque está la policía, ¿no?
Que no, pienso que no va a poder pasar. En algunas zonas va a pasar.
As Peru's government looks to make a good impression over the next week, the threat of strikes and protests remain, with union leaders deliberately planning them for the climax of this year's forum, saying it's an opportunity to highlight Peru's issues to the world, hoping that being on the international stage will prompt some changes on the domestic front. Scott Huang, Harel Hughes and Reese Ayers in Lima, Peru, for TaiwanPlus.
Stay tuned all this week for more of our reports coming out of Lima about the APEC summit. And thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Finally, we head to Mexico, where the first World Mariachi Congress wrapped up with a massive concert trying to set a world record. I'm Eric Gao. Take care. See you later on TaiwanPlus News.